Back to the sunshine with a high of 73. Friday, sunshine and 73, and next Saturday, sunshine and 73 degrees. Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
Can people really say goodbye to friends and family when they translate? What is the third man phenomena? Do paranormal experiences depend on what people bring to them? Hello and welcome to the 1013th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, coming to you from WOON AM and FM radio in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, on the Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live, and on YouTube. I'm Ben, and today we bring you an open line show, and my dad Paul is joining us via Skype today, but his voice is weak, so he'll chime in when he can. But also joining us. Oh yes, he will be listening, and he will provide what he can. And also joining us today via Skype is our Northern California show reporter and cousin, Rick Eno.
Hi, cousins.
Hello. Hold on, boys. We're gonna do a little thing. Alrighty,
A little
boys.
thing.
There we are. Now, you thought you could trick me this time, gremlins, but you couldn't. So now... So, there we go. So we have you guys on the air, and we have with us our one. You know, it's kind of like a fun joke. It's like, how many Enos does it take to do a radio show? And I guess the answer is 3 in this case.
The number will be growing as Aria wakes up.
Yeah, right. It's yeah, maybe we'll toss her a question. See how she does. Alrighty. So I guess we'll hop right into the questions here. And we're going to start with a couple from Facebook, unless you'd prefer we start with the question from Alex, Dad.
Well, why don't we start with Alex?
Okay. So we will start with Alex. So Alex M. writes to us, Hi, Paul and Ben. I had a question. My mother had an experience in the early 90s where a friend tragically took her own life. Before even getting the news, my mom said she was in the bathroom getting ready when she felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up and a presence behind her. She walked out to the living room where, on the wall, was a framed mirror my mother and her friend had made together. As my mother entered the room, this mirror was lifted off the hook and gently placed on the floor. 3 people witnessed this and were in shock, and my mother was to receive the news of her friend minutes later. To this day, she is convinced that this was her friend saying goodbye. My question is this. I know you and Ben believe that these are not spirits of people who passed and are parasites. No, not always. But in this case, why do you think the parasite waited all this time to make its presence known? There was no paranormal activity in this house before this incident. Thank you, and keep up the good work with the show.
Well, I have to jump in here. I don't know what this constant misunderstanding is. We do not believe that all ghosts are parasites. We believe that there is an important parasite factor in there, and that many will pretend to be loved ones so they can push your buttons and get something to eat. What you describe, Alex, is a classic visitation apparition. And it's very possible that that's exactly what it was. I think people get confused when we say we don't believe in the classical notion of the spirit, with spirits, ghosts, which are not possible under the laws of physics. But that does not mean we don't believe in parallel worlds where the laws of physics are different and people can manifest to their loved one and be very aware of it. I think that's a common phenomenon, and it's not parasites. Fellas?
After you, Rick.
Well, I can't really address what happened with the picture piece, but I can say that the part about the hair standing on the back of the neck and the instant of the suicide, I know I listened to many times Tracy Dolan, who is the wife of Richard Dolan, and she's a remote viewer, and she's also psychically sort of connected and has had lots of communication in her life sent via conscious highways and so forth to friends. And she speaks about a time where she was sending out a message to one of her friends, thinking about her and sending it out. At the same time, thinking nothing of it. But when she did catch up with her friend later, weeks later, she talked about receiving and thinking about her in this certain way or having this certain image, which is the one Tracy, I guess, put out there. So what I can say about that is that we are all connected somehow consciously. And maybe some of us are aware of it, others aren't. But maybe in that moment of death or that moment of just tragedy, that those signals become more cemented, and that they do reach out in a very rapid form. And someone that you love who's supposed to receive them does receive them, who's receptive to it and has a reaction to it. So I do believe that, because there's plenty of instances where people have lost people, or just something epic has happened. Maybe it's something very, very, very happy. And others have kind of known something before it was actually, the news was actually delivered. So on that piece, I think with the friend, you can definitely say, at least I would, that there is a conscious connection, and it goes far beyond what people would typically expect in our world. As far as the I'm going to leave it with what Paul said for the rest of it, because the parallel worlds and so forth, the laws of physics are different. I'm going to leave that to Paul's explanation.
Yeah, fair enough. I guess that makes it my turn. What does this Eno have to say about all of this? Well, I think it's important that everybody experiences these things differently, and I think it's safe to always attribute any phenomena to one thing or another, and unfortunately, not everything is that black and white. So not everything is a parasite, and not everything is benevolent. But there's always a middle ground, and there should be a middle ground for most things. And I think it's important that with relationships to people, it's not really a one-sided thing. I think there's this personally, experiencing the world. There's always this tendency to kind of, at least in the modern world, there's a tendency to make relationships one-sided, and it's not always the case, right? It's always a give and take. It's always like a two-way street, right? At least it should be, right? In a healthy relationship, and we exist in a web of relationships. Everybody is connected to everybody in some way, shape, or form, right? It's like Rhode Island is a great example, right? There's always like at least 1 or 2 degrees of separation between everybody in the state, and it's always kind of funny when you run into anybody from Rhode Island, because it's like, oh, who do you know? What town are you from? Oh, do you know so and so, etc. And it's like, it's one big small town in that regard. And in a sense, the multiverse, the world, that's kind of how it stays. There's these webs of relationships that continue on even after somebody leaves the state or the town or your neighborhood, right? The relationship continues. And I think in some cases it's a bit more dramatic than others, but I can honestly say with loved ones that I have had that have passed, it's like I know that relationship is still going, and it's still very much there. It's it's not just because somebody leaves, it's like, okay, cool, they're gone. Object permanence isn't a thing. It's like, yeah, they're just out of here, out of sight, out of mind. It's like they continue elsewhere. And I think that's something to kind of point out as a personal belief of mine. But in this instance, it's I wish I had an explanation. I just don't, because it's relationships aren't really logical things, and you can't really put like a scientific point on it. Because it is possible that it is just straight up multiverse activity where this person is they're interacting with this world where they're not, et cetera, but at the end of the day it's still a personal experience with somebody, and I can't kind of negate it or explain it in a way, but you'll know it by how it affects somebody. If it's positive, which in this instance it was, then I'll take it for what it is. You know, that's kind of my 2 cents on the whole issue.
Well, Ben, and you may be able to identify this in Paul, but in the living world, you know, if you have a close relationship, for instance, and this isn't meant to be funny, though it might come off that way. My wife kind of knows when I'm up to something, right? She doesn't know what it is. She might not be seeing me, but she kind of knows. And what I'm saying is I'm not up to anything dastardly, but you know, I'm planning something. I have a project that I'm working on that I didn't tell her about, or something to do with living together. And that's not because she can see me, or she just kind of senses it. And I think in relationships, when you're close, in closeness can mean many different things, but when you're close, those connections are there. It doesn't matter, like you said, object permanence, if you're physically there or not. That highway is continuing, and that highway connects you. And if something's going on, you know, you can kind of sense it. And I the same thing myself. I could be out there and I can sense, I should call home. What's going on? You know, maybe she'll frequently have a question or need help. And it's not that I'm psychic at all, because I've never had those experiences. It's just a knowing, and that I think the connections with all people who are close in these intimate relationships have.
No, I agree, and it's kind of the same with my wife and I too. It's I think it's just you sort of share a part of yourself with everybody in a way, and vice versa, right? You know, two-way street. And in that instance, especially if you allow it, you can have very close relationships with certain people, or you know, pets, objects, whatever, right? It's like, you know, I've been feeling kind of not super great lately, so you know, I'm laying in bed, my cat will come over and lay on me, and he usually, you know, he only does that if he does something either like, you know, little bit on the deceitful side, or if he actually cares. And he didn't do anything wrong, didn't break anything, but you know, it's like my wife will know when something's up, and it's like it's you know, similar in that sense too. And I think it's a really human experience to share intimate connections with people, especially across world boundaries, right? And it's like, especially if you have something super, you know, some super close relationship with somebody, like seeing them in dreams, or you know, even seeing apparitions of them, if you would. I don't know, I wish I could explain it better, but I think it's just ultimately a human experience.
Yeah.
One point in Alex's letter is that the person was a suicide. In my experience, visitation apparitions after suicides are unusual. I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Yeah, the more to learn, I guess, more to discuss, I suppose.
Right.
Well, I guess, shall we move on to the next? Which unfortunately, Rick, this is going to go right up your alley, as you were discussing before the show. So this was a comment left on our last YouTube, our last show, which got uploaded to YouTube. So this is our September 3rd show. I'm sorry, this was about a month ago. Regarding our September 3rd show on the congressional UAP hearings. Sorry about the technical issues that Lowenthal writes. Even though he did give us his real name, I don't have it up in front of me. I do apologize. It was challenging to make out the audio, which, again, apologies for the gremlins. But I do agree with the assessment these hearings will likely lead nowhere. So how do we feel about that, gentlemen?
Here's your big chance, Rick. Move on.
Oh, great.
Investigator.
You know, and I think you both will commiserate with me on this. How long have we been waiting for progress in disclosure? It's been 70 years. And every time we seem to make progress, it seems like progress at first, and I think it is to a degree, but it never really breaks the seal or the bubble. And I feel like, and I respect that everyone's looking into this, and I think the people that are trying to make this happen are real, dedicated. They want the answers out there. I do not believe personally that will ever be allowed to happen. Not through the government and not through what they have, and because it's actually beyond the government, in my opinion. It's some third sort of breakaway civilization it's been referred to that's really ultimately come out of this since 1947 that has formed and handles this topic. So I really don't believe you'll ever get the full story. You'll get bits and pieces, and it'll be given to you in bits and pieces. But you'll never be able to make the solid, firmness connection. That will have to come from outside of there. So I do believe that researchers like you cousins and the other people out there who are doing this in good faith and fighting the good fight, that's where the answers are going to come from. But the acknowledgement of the government, it's great to see on the hearings on the Hill. I haven't kept up with all of them, but I will say I don't see this becoming to a disclosure moment as people are thinking about it, where it's just all admitted and here are all the secrets. That will never happen. There's too much at stake. But what will happen is they will become a comfort level with that. Okay, there is something going on out there. Hey, you know what? There are aliens. How's that? And get to each phase like that. But I don't think there will be an actual full disclosure. I can't see it. There's been too much energy put into it over the years for a reason. People have died over this. Paul, you got followed through the desert just for being who you are, and you were too close to Area 51. There is way too much at stake here that we honestly don't even understand what's under the layers. So if answers come, it'll come from people like us on the outside, but it's not going to come from the U.S. government. Just not going to happen.
Well, you're initially you were much more optimistic than I ever was, because I never believed that there would be actual disclosure, Rick. I think that the only reason that any of this is happening is just it's money, right? That's really it. Is, in my opinion, it's just I think it's just in regards to money, right? You know, if there's some sort of, you know, I feel like the buzzword for the last year and a half has been existential threat. You know, what's more existentially threatening to what's more threatening to our existence than, you know, an inhuman force outside of our atmosphere, right?
Crank up the war machine.
Right. Yeah. I mean, hey, it's what we're good at. And I think that's kind of really what it comes down to. And excuse me, it's just very. I just don't think it's really going to be a thing. And I think that it's a little bit naive. Like we had Stephen Bassett on, you know, a couple months ago now.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how, oh well, you know, it'll cure the partisan divide. Our country's so divided. And this will be the thing that brings us together. And I was like, that's a nice thought, but like I just don't see how it would do that. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, because it's like, you know, most people under the age of like 50 are pretty okay with the idea of extraterrestrials. And it's, you know, I mean, everybody in my generation, yeah, we're totally okay with it. The problem is, you know, we have to pay bills still, so it doesn't really matter. It's like, yeah, cool, that's all good, but you know, how am I gonna, you know, make rent for the month? That's kind of like, exactly. You know, at the end of the day, it's like, well, what's the point of admitting anything other than, you know, you wonder what the government has to get out of it. And you know, that was my question to Stephen Bassett, and he said, well, you know, bring everybody together. And I was like, you know what, maybe. Maybe.
You know, Ben, it's kind of like this. The way I see it is, if there's a reason to bring, like, we'll use the example of bringing people together. If there's a reason to bring people together that fits the narrative for them, they're going to do it. So if we have to unify the world, the races, the cultures, everything, to fight a war against or battle against or face even a different alien culture, or, you know, something that we're not used to, sure, that'll do that. But it'll do it completely for the wrong reason, in my opinion. You don't want to come together because you went through some threatening situation, and that's the reason you made you were forced to do that. So I don't mean to be such a skeptic about things, But when it comes to this, I've just constantly seen it over and over again. The only time things are released is when it fits the narrative, and that's it, that they need, for whatever reason. And they may be thinking that we're protecting people because they could not handle what's coming. Like maybe the technology is too much, maybe the idea of it's too much. I don't know what their actual motive is, but I do know it's kept a secret, and I do know that it's a secret that they're willing to spend billions on. And I do know that people have died over it. So I have a hard time accepting anything other than nope, not going to happen.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. And weirdly enough, this does kind of lead into our next question, which is from Kieran in New Jersey. And he writes, your comments about how we define the term advanced really make me think. As you say, advancement should be spiritual and moral, not defined by technology, which would be very dangerous in the hands of spiritually and morally unadvanced. And the spiritual and moral, would they even feel the need for the kind of technology exhibited by UAPs? And that's a very good question. So what do you think, Rick?
Well, I do agree about the best advancement is through spiritual growth, conscious growth. Absolutely, because that's going to be peaceful and it's going to be light and love, which I'm a firm believer in. I also believe that technology is, as fun as it is, it's there to mimic what we can do, literally what our capabilities are, to communicate across great distances or different dimensions. We only use 10% of our brain. So I really believe that anything that's developed is already there at our fingertips, able to do it. We just have to learn how to do it. We have to accept our conscious beings that we let go of so long ago. So in a way, the technology that is out there, though it mimics what we can do, it's also there to sort of be a more physical world. And the more physical world you have, the less spirituality you're going to have. And with the less spirituality you have, I believe, the more corrupt and more immoral you become. It becomes about hedonism and pleasure. So if I'm answering the question correctly, I think that the best path is through spirituality and growth. But the more we get technology, the more it's in the wrong hands already. Because clearly you can see where we have picked up technology, and I don't even know if the proper word is bastardize it, because that's what it's there for. But we use it in ways that I see technology used in some great ways, but I see a lot of people get hurt and obsessed with it and kind of live it, and they can't escape it. So what does that say? What does that say for your soul? What does that say for you if you just want to be in this physical, impulse-driven world as opposed to a more spiritual, moral world where you're actually connecting through what your capabilities are without any technology?
That is.
I think.
What do you think, Dad?
Well, I think Hollywood occasionally gets it right. I don't know if that's a mistake or what, but in the Right Stuff, the original 1983 film, there was a scene that struck me, and that's during John Gled's flight. Gordon Cooper was in Australia, and he was entering a radar station to talk to Gled as he passed overhead. And he runs into a couple of Aboriginal people, people I rubbed elbows with in the 70s, not the same actors, obviously. But he said, I'm going to be helping out my friend. He's passing overhead up in outer space. And the Aboriginal guy says, oh, you blokes do that too? Cooper said, oh, you mean you do that yourself? Oh, not me, man. See that old bloke there? The elder. He knows the stars. He knows the planets. He knows the Milky Way. So without any technology, shamanic peoples will tell you that you can do anything. You can go anywhere, and it's real. Maybe that sums up the point.
Great point, Paul. I love that.
You know, there's a very. I was watching this this really interesting little documentary about Edward Bernays, and for those of you who don't know who he is, he's basically the father of modern marketing and propaganda in the United States. He was best known for his work working for cigarette companies and General Electric in like the 30s, 40s, 50s, and he pioneered modern like marketing techniques using psychology. I think he was like the grandson of Freud or something. I got to double check exactly how he's related to Freud, but I know some. Oh yeah, Anna Freud was his mother, and I think Sigmund Freud was his uncle. There we go. So he was related to Freud, right? So psychology is his thing, whatever, and he created this campaign where it was sort of like the late 30s, early 30s, like prior to World War II. Everybody's kind of very conservative with their money, and then World War II happens. Everybody goes out, and they're doing, the women are going to work, the men are going to fight, and they come back, and they go back to living very frugal lives. And so the industry was booming, and so they had a problem. The problem was there were too many products and not enough people consuming them. And so he had an answer for the problem. And he was like, all right, you guys are marketing this all wrong. Don't market to a need, market to a want. And so he created all these campaigns to pretty much trick people into buying things they didn't need. And so it became he created modern consumer culture. And through that, it ended up creating this culture of just consume, 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 consume. And, well, looks like we're at our break. I'll continue my thought after the break. And maybe it'll be better structured this time. So you're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno here on WOON, AM and FM, here in Woonsocket's beautiful Blackstone River Valley. We'll be right back.
Casey Kasem has unlocked the American Top 40 vaults and is replaying original shows from the 80s. This week, Casey takes you back to September 13th, 1986. That's when Huey Lewis was happy to be stuck with you. Belinda Carlisle was mad about you. Lionel Richie was dancing on the ceiling. And Cyndi Lauper showed her true colors. You'll hear those songs, all the top 40 hits, and the long-distance dedications from September 13th, 1986, right here on American Top 40, the 80s.
Local and live at 99.5 FM.
Welcome back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, coming to you from WON AM and FM radio here in Blackstone River Valley's beautiful Woonsocket, Rhode Island, on this rather rainy day here. It's we have 75 degrees outside the studio, and boy oh boy, personally I enjoy a nice rainy day. I don't know about you gentlemen, but it's kind of nice. It's cooling, it's calming, and we can get right back into the spirituality, necessities, and technology. And I'm going to hop right back into this by linking this with a really interesting idea that I got from H.P. Lovecraft. I've been reading At the Mountains of Madness for the last couple of weeks now, and I think it's really fascinating how in tune he was with things, in a sense, and this idea of technology from alien entities that are just, completely beyond our comprehension. And I think everybody loses that in translation, because we always think about technology we know and we understand, and it's like, oh, it's anti-gravity and whatever. But what about things we don't understand? And so this need to constantly consume, and with given technology we don't understand, our main objective is to control the world around us, which has always been a thing, right? If we constantly consume and we need things to constantly occupy us, so that we can control the world around us, which really is what it comes down to, right? It comes down to us expressing a want to create a world that's ours, rather than, existing in a world that, we're a part of. Individual worlds rather than being a part of a world, not in a multiversal sense, but in a sort of maybe cosmological sense, where we exist as part of a whole rather than individuals that are living their own sort of little bubble lives. And so here we are, right? We have alien entities that give us things. When we look at different mythologies, right? Prometheus springs to mind immediately. He gives man fire, and the gods are all upset, and they're like, what are you doing? They don't know what to do with this, and then they punish him for eternity. And so But you look at other mythologies too, right? You know, you have like the Anunnaki of the Mesopotamians, right? They come out of the sea. They're these fish people, Lovecraft, and you know they go to the Hittites, and they're like, all right, you're gonna create the Code of Hammurabi, and we're gonna give you all these gifts, and you're gonna do some crazy stuff when they go to Hammurabi, and then it's just all these things throughout history where you have these like alien beings, right? Whether they come out of ships or they come out of the ocean or they just kind of appear, right? They're a part of these things, and they give people technology, and they say, here you go, here's how you do metallurgy, here's how you do music, here's how you do makeup or whatever. And they're not necessarily bad, right? Technology is ambiguous at the end of the day. It's what you do with it. And I think that that's kind of the big thing is if you take this thing and try to control the world around you, which a lot of us do, because in a sense we're all already cyborgs, because we're already merged with technology. I mean, I'm wearing headphones right now so I can hear you gentlemen. I'm wearing glasses so that I can see you gentlemen, and also the things in front of me. I have a link to every piece of knowledge, whether true or false, in the world, sitting in the palm of my hand. And in a sense, we're given all these things, and what are we doing with them? And there's a really interesting statistic I saw, and this is the end of my rambling here, where there's an incredible lack of creativity nowadays, and creativity leads to innovation. And because everybody's constantly entertained, nobody's bored anymore. So there's no need to innovate. There's no need to use your imagination. And so there's an incredible lack of innovation because nobody's bored anymore. You're just constantly entertained. And I think that's really fascinating because, boredom leads to imagination, leads to ingenuity, leads to new ideas, leads to new technologies. And so, where are we going from here? We don't know. This is all uncharted territory we're in right now. And I think it's very important for us to be understanding of ourselves versus trying to control everything around us. Internalize rather than externalize, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I like what you said about being given technology through time, through outside forces. Because if you think about like how our world operates with countries, I mean, just if you want to expand on that, the United States has a position, France has a position, Russia has a position, and they all aid and give things to other countries with indifference to the other countries at times. And I think about that a lot as how we get technology. I don't think there's a single place that we get technology. I think our group of beings, I think it comes in from different groups who don't necessarily sign off on what we're getting. And that's why there's sort of an explosion in the most recent 90s forward in technology, because some serious technology was passed. But I believe that's how it happens. Different groups influence us differently from the peripheral by giving us this technology or technologies that we might even not seem like a technology to us, like you mentioned, fire. That started there. There was the wheel, and just keep going forward. So that's sort of my take on it.
Yeah, I'm kind of I don't disagree, and I guess we'll hop into the next question here, which is from Terry in Uxbridge, Massachusetts, right here in our local listening area. And Terry writes, "Have you said that you have said that people bring critical elements of their own paranormal experiences, and that helps determine what they take away from the experience. What do people who are parasite victims bring to the table, especially in possession cases?" Which is a very good question, actually. Would you like to touch on this, Dad?
Yeah, I better. Having been involved in some of those cases early in my career, I have to say that possessed people are not necessarily what they appear to be in the movies. In my experience, there was a certain identity point, as we say, between the parasite, I think it's a parasite, and the host, if you will. It gets to the point where they almost become one, and there's an identity that allows a certain amount of control from the parasite. I do not believe that the entire personality of the victim is subverted, and what they bring to it is a certain tacit agreement. I've always found the victims to be loathly, dissatisfied, very often angry, ringing the dinner bell for parasites. And I think that the parasite will answer that call. And I think that there's a certain degree of cooperation. Sounds funny, but I think that's what I've seen in possession cases.
Paul, do you feel in the cases that you've seen demonic possession or just possession in general, do you feel that the victim in it is sort of complicit because there's a certain amount of comfort that parasite provides them that's missing in their lives? It may be fake, it may be real, but do you feel that that's sort of like the enticement? Like there's a certain amount of comfort, I guess is the word, in having that experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've really seen where people have essentially felt that they were, failures in this or drug addicts or whatever, but yet there's this cosmic being paying attention to them. And that means a lot to some of these people. It's sick, but it's true.
Yeah. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I think that there's a really important point to be made, that it depends on, I think your cultural background really depends a lot on how it's experienced. And I'll give an example. So, recently I had a conversation with somebody, and we were talking about, a mutual friend of ours, and they were acting kind of weird and whatever, and it was it was like I remember we were kind of going, like, oh wow, they're acting really weird, really really kind of angry, upset, really irrational, and someone was like, oh, what if it's like, what if it's something like spiritual, blah blah blah, and I was like, I mean, it could be, but I kind of thought back, and I was like, oh, they've kind of been drinking a lot lately. They might just it might just be some neurochemical thing too. And now that's not to say that it's mutually exclusive, but I think that there's a really important thing where it's very easy to distill all of these experiences down to, oh yeah, it's just this, it's just that, because the problem is that there's multiple layers to everything we experience. And I think just from having experienced parasite cases in which there's been obsession, not quite possession, but being present for that, I think that there's a really important element in how we understand our experience of it, because there's so many different definitions of possession that we have. And I think the easiest one for everybody to recognize is the Hollywood definition, where, oh, well, it's this malevolent spirit that takes over and you have no control over it. And I've seen that expressed in a lot of sort of unhealthy spiritualities, where like oh, the devil's out to get you, they're gonna get you, and all this stuff. And it's like, as somebody who grew up not in that world, it's very odd to me to look at that and say, well, I don't. It's like, yeah, I mean, I know that that's it's a thing, but it's like, it's not like you kind of have to agree to it, and it's interesting, right? Because you look at people who have had substance abuse problems, or like they have a problem where they eat too much and they have an eating disorder, or lack thereof, and they physically change. There's like a physical change you can see in them, and when they start to get healthy, they sober up, they kind of manage their issues, and they deal with these quote unquote demons of themselves, right? Whether it's some issues they've had in the past, some really negative stuff, they physically change. You see them become healthier, they become more themselves. And I think that there's so many, there's such an easy way to blame other things, and not to say that there isn't that layer of parasites or whatever that are involved in that can feed off of the behavior, but there's it's so complex because it's like, you know, the range of human experience is just so vast and dynamic that it's very hard to say, well, you know, they just agreed to it because it's, you know, great. But, you know, people have their own issues, and if they don't get the help that they need, it can turn into other things. It's like going to a doctor, right? Let's say you get a cut and you go to the doctor and the doctor says, yeah, there's nothing wrong with you, but I'm not going to treat it. Or, you know, if you get a cut and you don't go to the doctor, you don't get it treated, you don't do anything about it, and then eventually it just kind of festers and gets worse and worse and worse, and you just get so used to it that you're like, yeah, whatever, it's just kind of a thing. But, you know, anything can be healed. You just need to, you know, go and deal with it. And I think that there's always this out of thinking, well, you know, I'm not really worth it. You know, this thing's beating me down. I just kind of have to accept it. And that's kind of, I think, where parasites start to come in and kind of manipulate things a little bit. And it's just very complex. And so personally, after seeing the side of, it's all demons, they're all coming to get you, and then seeing the other side of it, it's just brain chemistry. It's like, no, there's definitely a middle ground there where the two overlap in some way, shape, or form. But the problem is that, you know, you have to focus on the person that's experiencing these things, and how one can help them and be a resource for them, rather than, well, you know, it's just demons, let's do an exorcism and be out of here. Or, well, it's just brain chemistry, give them a bunch of pills and they'll be fine. It's a really complex issue.
Yes, indeed.
Any thoughts, Rick?
Well, I'm going to defer to what again Paul said when it comes to, I mean, what you both said just kind of encapsulates everything. It's that part of the sort of the paranormal, which, you know, seems really complicated and complex because it is. There's physics involved and so forth. I really kind of stand back on a bit because there are so many facets to it that you really have to study it for decades, which you both have, to really wrap your mind around it. It's not that I don't understand it, but I have nothing more to offer than what you both said. But you provoked a lot of thought in me regarding it. So I think that was a great question. Sparked a lot of conversation.
Yeah. I mean, it's not. Excuse me. I mean, it's not to say that it's like my dad's incorrect. I don't think that's true. I think that there's a very important part of it. But there's a portion of humanism. Well, I don't know if humanism is the right word. Kind of looking at it that it's like, you know, not how we experience the world through our traditions and how we understand things, right? It's a subject-object problem. You know, there's an objective reality and there's a subject that's experiencing that objective reality, and that subjective experience is informed by prior experience. And so it's kind of like, okay, yeah, so this is, you know, I'm looking at an 8, I see an 8, you know, you look at it from the side, you say it's an infinity sign, right? And it's like, okay, well, we're looking at it from two different angles, so we see different things, but there's something there that we know is there. And, you know, how we...
You know, I was going to say, Ben, you know, some of it is the way the world's set up. Like, I'm very happy with this permutation of me in this world, right? I like my physical world. I'm very curious about everything, but I'm very happy with this permutation of me. But there's probably, most likely, from what I have come to believe and understand through Paul's work and your work, is that there's probably other permutations of me out there. And we're each probably equally, or not equally, I should say, happy with that permutation. But every permutation is going to see the world through a different angle, like what you just said about 8 and then the infinity sign, right? And that's a fascinating thought, to think that I could be somewhere else with a different perception of the world, given this current permutation of me. I always found what was fascinating most with Paul's work was when he would meditate and he'd encounter other people going through these dimensional changes. I remember that one gentleman who I believe was in may possibly an airplane crash and was in the basement of a church. I can't think of a better example of permutations of a person changing into and evolving into I don't know, the next version of themselves or another version of themselves. So I'll shut up from here because I'll just keep rambling.
Well, hey, it's I think it's in the genes here at this point. So I guess we can kind of hop into our next question here. So Samurai Botham writes to us. I believe this is a YouTube comment. John Geiger relates a number of cases in his book about people in life-threatening situations in the seas being led to safety by voices, lights, and phantasms. Any comments? And this is John Geiger, the best-selling author of The Third Man Factor, Surviving the Impossible. So this is...
John is someone I want to get on the show very soon if we can. The subject interests me because it's happened to me. I describe in one of my books how I was in the survival training in the Yukon, 1979, and was caught in an avalanche, and a third something pulled me out from 8 feet of snow. And so I want to call it an angel or whatever, it's happened to me. And Ben, I don't know if your experience in the hydroplaning in the car we used to call the Bumblebee would count for that, but
oh yeah, that thing was a
everybody
death
has
trap.
their story.
Oh yeah, well, the Bumblebee was a death trap. I'm surprised that thing lasted as long as it did. It was not meant for New England weather or roads. I mean, I don't know. I still think a lot about that. I don't know if I can definitively say it was a third man experience. It might have been, but it was definitely odd. I do remember I would go and visit my now wife, then girlfriend, up in Worcester. She went to Assumption College, and I would go up and visit every so often. By every so often, I mean every week. And I was driving up in weather similar to what we have outside right now, and it was pouring rain. And I was driving a 1992 Geo Metro, which, if anybody knows anything about cars, it was considered by Consumer Magazine to be one of the worst cars ever made. And it was a funny car. It was a silly little goofy banana yellow car that was a convertible that was not meant for New England weather. So it was just very, very dangerous to drive.
Your automobile choices are interesting.
Well, to be fair, I didn't choose it. It was my father bought it because he thought it looked cool, and it did initially. But then my brother needed a car, and then I would borrow it from time to time. So it was a whole thing. So I drove it up there, and I was driving down 146. And anybody who's a local who's familiar with 146 knows it's a very dangerous road to drive in most weather, even in normal weather. So I was driving down, and there was a spot where right before you get off in, I think it's Lackey Dam Road, it used to be pretty bad. They recently redid it, but there used to be pooling, there would just be no drainage at this one portion of the bottom of a hill, so you could very easily hydroplane. And I was driving, and I was late, and so I was I was trying to speed up, and that thing was you could probably do 65, maybe if you were lucky. And so I was speeding down, and I remember before I left, my dad was like, "Oh, well, be careful," and he was really worried about me. And so I was driving, and I get to this little patch, and I kind of had this weird sort of experience where I thought I was kind of zoning out, daydreaming a little bit. And I kind of was and at some point I realized I was like, oh, I'm on the other side of the road now, because I remember starting to skid. And then I was on the other side of the road, and I think I switched lanes, and I was like, oh, okay, I'm fine. That's weird. And I kind of had this sense that maybe something happened, but I don't know. And when I got to my then girlfriend wife's dorm, I pulled in, and I walked in, and she was like, she's like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm fine. Why?" And she was like, "I don't know. I just had this really weird feeling that like something happened." And I was like, "No, I'm okay. I'm not sure why you're saying that." And it was kind of one of those things that kind of pushed away for a bit. But it was a really odd experience because I remember it pretty vividly, even now. But maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I don't know. I'm not gonna put a label on it. So I guess that's kind of what do you think about third man experiences, Rick?
You know, I've never had a third man experience that I can recall, but I've heard a lot about them. I do think we have what some people would call guardian angels out there for whatever reason that kind of look after you in times. Maybe they know well, obviously they know something we don't. So I do believe in them. I can't explain them, but I think like anytime you've had a near-death experience, I think there's more at play there than probability that you survived.
Well, there is evidence of a higher self, for lack of a better term. Experiments have been done where the two hemispheres of the brain have been separated, and the person develops two entirely different personalities. So there are all sorts of experiments and evidence that point to us being more than we appear.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's definitely true, and I, it's so easy to grossly oversimplify it, but the human experience is very vast and complicated. So I think we're kind of coming down to the wire here, gents. We could attempt to take another question. We have about 2 left on the list here. Well, this isn't really a question. I guess I can bring it up, and this is from Indrid Cold. The username Indrid Cold, which I believe is from YouTube. It's a YouTube comment.
You never know.
Hey, coming out of the woodwork to comment on our YouTube channel. And they write, I highly recommend National UFO Reporting Center on YouTube. No ads, too. Real phone calls from witnesses, police, pilots, radar operators, to the average Joes. Hours and hours of calls. The gentleman that ran the call center, Bob Gibble, manned the phone 24/7 with the help of his wife and other staff members, and highly recommended. Which I've never actually seen. Rick, have you seen it?
Oh, Norfolk? Which one? The National UFO Reporting Center? I use it all the
Yeah.
time.
Oh,
Use
yeah.
it all the time.
I meant the YouTube version of it. Have you ever listened to any of those?
I've occasionally listened, but what I use the Norfolk for, along with MUFON's database, is to when I get a case, wherever it comes from, I go to those 2 databases first to see if it's been reported or something similar has been reported to it. Norfolk is great. It is a labor of love. It's not as detailed as like MUFON's the database. In fact, I don't think anything's as detailed as MUFON's database.
No.
I mean, it's amazing, but it's a great source because if I get something here, I can check Norfolk for the date and some particulars, and it could be happening a similar instance could have happened in Okinawa, or it could have happened down the road in Southern Cal, and it helps me build sort of a plan for what's going on. In one particular instance, I had a MUFON case of a craft. I had a Norfolk case of the same, what appeared to me to be the same craft, to be about 90 miles north, and then another Norfolk and MUFON report of the craft then to be southeast in the same sort of appropriate timeline. So Norfolk is great, big fan of it. I know it's hard to manage, but you don't get the particulars out of it. So if you do want more on a case from Norfolk, you're going to have to call and try to network to get more information if it's really important. But a big fan of it. I don't know that it's appropriate for when it's helped to be supportive of cases, but having conversations about it of those cases can be limited because it's just limited information. The YouTube stuff's pretty good. It is. They have some great articles. I'm a fan of them.
Neat.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, on that note, I believe it's time for our announcements, gentlemen. And so we will begin with the 2023 Western Connecticut UFO Conference that's presented by the Danbury Library. Will take place virtually and in person from October 22nd to the 29th. Events will begin on this show on October 22nd with very special guest Reverend Michael Carter of Ancient Aliens and live audience interaction. And more information to come on that. And the Greater New England UFO Bigfoot Conference, UFO/Bigfoot Conference, I should be specific, is back. This will be a one-day event on November 19th at the Veterans Memorial Center in Leominster, Massachusetts. Watch for more information on that.
Okay. Visit our show website, behindtheparanormal.com, where you can find nearly 1,200 hours of regular shows and special broadcasts since 2008 from CBS Radio, Achieve Radio, and here on Woon AM and FM. Also hear many of the broadcasts on major podcast platforms, including iTunes, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube.
You can download our show app. It's free from behindtheparanormal.com, where you can browse our books along with those of our guest co-hosts. There's plenty of things on our charity page as well. So I guess we'll hop to what's going on next week, which is September 17th. We'll take a trip into remote viewing with MUFON's Christopher Harmon.
Ooh. We leave you today with the thought from American author Frank Herbert. The beginning of knowledge is the discovery of something we do not understand. I'm Rick Eno.
I'm Paul Eno.
I'm Ben Eno, and thanks for joining us on our great cosmic journey, and we shall see you next time on Behind the Paranormal.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. Broadcasting live and local daily from the Navigant Credit Union broadcast studio at the corner of Park Avenue and Kennedy Street in Woonsocket. This is ON AM and FM.
WOON, Woonsocket.
And now, Premier Networks proudly present Casey Kasem's American Top 40, the 80s. This week's presentation is from September 13th, 1986.
Hello again, and welcome to American Top 40. I'm Casey Kasem, and I'm all set to count down the biggest hits in the USA. The official Billboard survey says these are the records you're buying and radio stations are playing all over America. Now, before we start our climb to the number one song in the land this week, let's review last week's top 3. At number 3 last week was Higher Love by Steve Winwood. Number 2 was Take My Breath Away by Berlin. And last week's number 1 was this smash.